Jason.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, not too bad, not too bad. I'm growing out a bit of a beard.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, it looks like you've just stepped off of a transatlantic uh, sort of sail.
It
Uh,
would look like I said I just stepped off of a transatlantic sail, bar the fact that I'm not super sun kissed. Like whenever I hang out at the sailing club, there are people who are weathered.
yeah, yeah, they've got the leather boot kind of uh, faces. Mine's also like quite scraggly, but I look more like a bum than a sailor, I'd say. So I would probably be like the new kind of, maybe I work for the Times or something, and I'm trying to do a little piece on what it's like to be a sailor.
Right, or you could be a tech entrepreneur who has just made it big and realized that life holds no joy from frivolous spending. Bought yourself a boat and decided to, live a chilled life, traveling from place to place slowly, mindfulness. You know,
Yeah,
no more fast-paced lifestyle for you.
I mean, it must be quite an interesting experience once you head over the horizon. Suddenly, there's no coastline anymore, and you're in the
Hmm.
middle of the ocean. And maybe it's been a couple of days. It must be quite a maybe a daunting experience if you haven't done it before. I'm just trying to, put myself in that position, what I would be thinking.
You'd probably be thinking, I really hope that my sextant works.
I hope the sextant works. I hope there is. I hope the world is still round.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine going on a 2 month transatlantic voyage on like a 26-foot yacht, uh, in like let's say February of 2020, and then arriving at the port of call and there's no one anywhere, and you just like walk out of your boat onto the marina, and like one guy kind of scurries up to you with a mask and he's like, "Excuse me, sir, can I please take your temperature?" And you're like, "Are the zombies here?"
Get back on your boat, like row
Oh
out.
shit, yeah, they probably would. They'd probably tell you to get back on your boat.
I think it'd probably be a better experience than being, locked up in a room. I was browsing through different ships, or like yachts for sale, and there's some pretty scraggly looking yachts. They can be quite small, and some of the yachts that you see for sale, they're like built in the 50s and 60s, or like they're 20, 30 years old.
When we were sailing in a pretty old South African built 28-foot sailing yacht, I believe.
I think it was a Mera, a Myra, a Mera,
Mira, yeah. A Panama rigged sloop.
a sloop. Yeah,
Can you tell me what defines a Panama rigged sloop, Jason?
yeah. You're pressuring me now. So it's having a so the Panama rig is the configuration of the mainsail and the jib, and
Hmm.
the sloop is that the mainsail is behind foresail, right?
It could be actually. So I prepared over here and I made sure that I had the competent crew course book with
Oh
me,
yeah,
and there are the sloop is, yeah, it's just the mainsail with a front jib, um,
yeah, yeah.
and yeah, that's pretty much it.
For those who are probably listening, we actually did some sailing courses. Well, it must have been like must have been like at least 4 months ago.
It was still summer, so it must have been like 7 or 8 months ago. It was right at the beginning of this year. I'd say in like March.
Hmm. Yeah, it was around March because I think I was planning to leave in April.
I still haven't been on a boat since then.
Really?
I've been on Whitney's new Habibi, but I haven't actually sailed since then. And
Yeah,
it's one of those things. It's like the final couple of days that we were sailing together, there were just whales just
yeah,
diving in and out around the boat, and some dolphins and penguins, and it was such a magical experience. And winter in Cape Town, as you know, is quite a wet affair. And I can't imagine like getting out into the boat and just like raining and cold after having such gorgeous sailing weather in what, February, March.
Yeah, and I told you about that storm. So I read that book called Wrecked, and that I think it was in 1865. It was around about May. There was what they called the Great Storm,
Hmm.
and I think the storm raged on for 18 hours. And by the end of it, there were 17 ocean-going vessels that were wrecked, and about 30 sort of smaller boats were all wrecked in Table Bay. So that's a lot of carnage, and I
That's a
believe
lot of
60
wreck.
people lost their lives in that one storm. So if that's any consolation of not going out when it's winter in Cape Town, I think that's a good reminder.
Yeah, I definitely say that like sailing in the Mediterranean is a lot more chilled than sailing around the Cape of Good Hope.
I My gran has a friend who was selling there. They've also just been doing a bunch of sailing around the world, and the comment from them was that it they've definitely noticed over many years of sailing that the seas are changing, and that's probably because of the climate changes all around the globe. So I mean, it sounds like now's the best time ever to be buying a boat and actually going sailing because it could get worse.
That makes sense, and I mean, it's. I guess it's not necessarily the seas are changing certainly, um, but we have just noticed that weather patterns in general are changing. We're getting more and more extreme weather, your hurricanes and your tropical storms and this and that. So it's certainly becoming unpredictable. So you've got the old sailors who like, I know these seas like the back of my hand, and then it's like boom, hurricane, and all that's
Yeah,
found is just a bright red beanie on the seashore.
yeah, exactly. From a scale of 1 to 10, how ready are you to cross an ocean right now?
Ooh, to cross an ocean, I would say a firm like. Okay, let me preface this with a question. Um, is there a captain? Like, is there a competent
Either you or I are the
seaman?
captain.
Oh no, I definitely not. Well, you and I cannot cross the ocean right now, Jason. I'm gonna just put that out there. I'm pretty optimistic about quite a lot of things, but the if something goes wrong in this specific case, we have zero ocean going experience. We got through the comp crew course pretty well, right? But it was also like such mild weather the entire time that it's like, okay, we're going to be doing a whole bunch of reefing of the mainsail. Now, reefing of the mainsail is done when there's like extra amounts of wind, and you just need to reduce the area of the mainsail to make sure that you don't keel over too much. And uh, we were doing it in
Yeah,
a mild breeze. It's like, all right, let's take it down to the first reefing point, and you go through the entire thing. Now, imagine trying to do that, but the thing's like, really lilting over, and you're like clipped in, getting hit with waves.
yeah, you have to be really clipped in. And also in researching for this episode, I found out two things. One of them is that having a banana on a ship, especially a private boat, is considered bad luck. And I think on two occasions that trip, we actually had bananas on the boat. And the second one is that also whistling is considered bad luck.
Okay, neat.
I think Nick was probably a little bit probably a little bit nervous because he seemed like the kind of person who was, all up into the traditions.
Mm. I'm currently reading a book called Red Seas Under Red Skies, and it's all it's pirates and all of that, and sailing, and it's a thrilling read. But their superstitions in the book is that you have to make sure that you have cats on your ship, right?
Yeah,
Because cats obviously they take care of the mice and rats and stuff, but also the deity of the ocean, Iono, just really likes cats, so wouldn't want to sink a vessel that has cats on it. And then if the cats disappear off of the vessel, like or if they die, it's considered
mm,
like a really really bad omen, and you'd better get to the nearest point of call and find yourself some cats because something has gone terribly wrong, and Iono is coming for you.
I mean, even if you just have them for company.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, except for yourself and like and me to a certain extent, because I think we're quite allergic to them. So
Yeah.
it'd have to be a cat that stays outside and is waterproof. Uh, uh,
Or if you're Afrikaans, you can get a siakat.
yeah, or just a catfish.
Or a catfish,
That
yeah, just
would
like have it, chill with you in a barrel.
work. Yeah, apparently it's quite an easy trip if you go from the Canary Islands down to I think it's Cape Verde, and then you enter
Mm,
around the equator. And there was like a whole bunch of superstitions around when you cross the equator. There's like a certain badge of honor in the sailing world, and there's certain sort of ceremonies that were practiced once you cross the equator because it's considered like a sign of competence, right?
nice.
And interestingly, it's also there's a lot of symbology in the tattoos that pirates would have around sailing. So things like after getting 5,000 nautical miles, I think you had one of those. I think it was like a swallow that you got tattooed onto you.
Ooh, I've got a swallow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a swallow on my arm over here, and it's the traditional form of swallow.
Oh yeah,
So that's a sailing tattoo, huh?
it is a sailing tattoo, and it's actually interesting because there's a lot of like tattooing was part of the pirates' way of showing to a certain degree what they'd done. And then there was also crosses and a lot of words like writing about like lost parents, and you always see that mom tattoo. That's
Yeah.
kind of got its tradition in pirates and those kind of things. So it's quite interesting. And then also you have things like I think I read here. So pirates would often have the words "hold fast" tattooed onto their knuckles
Okay.
in order to protect them from falling, well, aloft. So if you can think as a pirate climbing up these big nets to go and unravel some sort of sail, or I don't know, maybe they would, I don't know how you would, reef one of these huge sailing vessels. But I imagine they had to do some form of it.
A fair amount of pulling, and I believe that they didn't have the fancy, one way winches that modern sailing vessels have.
Yeah, I don't think so. They probably just had manpower and
Yeah, I mean, like you can get a block and tackle, right? But it still goes the other way, and you don't want to catch your fingers in that.
yeah. I wonder if they even had like a ratchet mechanism that was so concise, because the ones that we were
Mm,
using, the ratchets inside of the tumbler, so you could just like ratchet it. They probably just had people, you know, like maybe those wooden ones where you spin it round.
right. So I really love pirate stories. Pirate stories are some of the neatest things, and like pirates were, terrible people to a certain extent. Just it was a life of crime. Um, but there is a specific pirate story that I'm a big fan of, and it's the story of Steed Bonnet, who was sometimes called the gentleman pirate, and he was actually like a wealthy landowner, and then decided to abandon his family and go turn to a life of crime. And he was just like the worst pirate. Now I don't remember the details of the story. I highly recommend you go and you read about it. But there's this one part where everyone just kind of like all of his crew dislike him, and he's terrible at what he does. And then he meets uh Blackbeard in uh, Barbados or somewhere around somewhere, and Blackbeard convinces him to allow Blackbeard, who currently didn't have a ship, to be the under captain. So essentially, he reports to Steed, to the gentleman pirate, and then the crew report to him. But then, in true pirate fashion, Blackbeard just takes his ship and takes his crew. and that's it.
That is very interesting because I actually have a little snippet here. Uh, so on a ship, uh, there was quite a good level of democracy on the ship. So you would have the captain who would have basically full control of the ship. And then there was a quartermaster who was a representative of the crew at the same level of the captain, but only under battle would the captain have full authority.
Hmm.
And what I found interesting is that both the captain and the quartermaster are elected in a democratic fashion. And at any time, they could hold an election, which I think would be referred to as a mutiny, and they could change the captain. So if you were a particularly bad captain and you weren't fair to your sailors or the other pirates, then you would be kind of voted out. And it was also quite interesting to just know about that quartermaster role, who is almost like he speaks on behalf of the he would bring the voice of the pirates to the captain and give that equal balance. So
That is quite interesting.
that is quite interesting, and it's interesting that it's come out in somewhat a way in that story where he was probably playing that role of the quartermaster, uh, where he was kind of like not the full captain, but being the voice of the pirates, which is quite interesting. And I think, I mean, a lot of people probably they left the sort of normal world. I think the reason why people went to piracy was probably because of when you're down and out, what's better than going out into the sea and plundering some ships, right?
Well, so it actually started out as governmentally sanctioned privateering, which was ships, well, crews and ships that were uh, allowed to go and harass and steal from other other countries or whatever's ocean going vessels to essentially hamper them because they were in conflict with, say, the crown at the time. And then what happened is, with a lot of them, they just decided to not stop doing that.
Hmm.
I mean, it's it's like, your country's like, you're allowed to do crime just to other countries, and you live a life where you're just like fighting for your survival and also incredibly independent. I can imagine at the end when the crown has resolved its issues with this other country or something, it's like, all right, you're not allowed to do that anymore. And you're like, are, are you gonna stop me? Because the other countries couldn't stop me.
That's it. And it's a interesting thought experiment to think about how those battles played out.
Yeah.
We think about like modern warships, but if you had like a huge sailing vessel, I mean, the one thing that I didn't really think about a lot was when you're at sea on a ship of this great magnitude, and often there was fleets of ships, of sailing ships, and this is actually where the term flagship would be
Hmm.
about. So that would be the ship where the admiral was on, and to even direct the ships, there's this huge communication problem, alongside the fact that most ships had their cannon batteries on the sides. So, in order to even get close to another ship, and for a long time, the best attack mechanism was actually a boarding. So you would fire cannons, and that would be to almost scare.
Because you don't actually want to sink them.
No, because you want to board because you want the plunge.
Yeah.
And what I also found out was that the worst position to be on was when your is it the aft is facing the cannons. Then you would get what's called raking fire, where a cannonball would go along the decks almost.
Oh,
So
right.
in certain, I mean, I went through this like rabbit hole of different tactics of how they would position themselves, so that it's almost better to have it side on, because then the worst is the front and the back of the boat. Um, And you know, you also have the factor that the best point of sail is around 70 degrees into the wind. So all of these
Mm.
different factors play into the fact of you know two nations battling it out on the open waters. It must be quite a thrill.
Yeah, what's pretty impressive is also how pirates. So you would have, especially like Caribbean pirates, they tended to have just their ship, and they used to become quite infamous in, this was Blackbeard's ship or whatever. Whereas there is a Chinese woman. Uh, I don't know if I am pronouncing this correctly, but it's Zheng Yishao, and she was a pirate leader who was active in the South China Sea from the beginning of the 1800s for about 10 years. And she uh, became like the unofficial commander of the Guangdong Pirate Confederation, and her fleet was 400 vessels big, and there were between like 40,000 and 60,000 pirates essentially under her command, to the extent that like there were big conflicts between her and the East India Trading Company, the Portuguese Empire, and Qing China. So in the during the Qing Dynasty, and she was so powerful that when they started, like the Qing authorities put out warrants for her arrest and ransoms and everything, but she had an army, well, a navy. So she decided to surrender after a pretty fruitful career. So what she did is she sailed her uh, her fleet, or she took just like 24, 25 of her ships to the surrender. And because it wasn't like she wasn't really under threat at the surrender, is she managed to negotiate with the Qing authorities that she retain a substantial fleet and she avoid prosecution, and she just wasn't going to do crime anymore.
Oh wow.
Can you imagine being such a good pirate that authorities are like, well, just don't do it again?
Don't do it. We'll keep an eye on you. It was quite interesting because I believe the East India Company only had a maximum of 200 ships at their height, so she would have definitely outnumbered them.
Oh
But I
yeah,
imagine
yeah.
that they had a number of routes where they would be quite protected.
She was also like a fearsome strategist, naval strategist. I mean, you don't become head of the pirate confederation, whatever,
Mm.
if you aren't super competent. And apparently, she was one of the most experienced and just uh, incredible ocean going people to date.
Yeah, it's just such a fascinating topic. Um, and then you know today we just have like random people who go out and sail and they almost do it on a sport basis, right? There's no there's no sort of need to go sail and find this treasure and live this life. It's
Yeah, because we have two things, right? Is we've got cargo ships for moving cargo about, and then
yeah,
we've got airplanes for moving people about,
yeah,
right? And so individual sailing yachts are kind of like horses.
mm,
There's absolutely no need for you to ever ride a horse, but if you're into horse riding, you can go and ride a horse.
yeah,
What I do find fairly interesting is, and we were chatting about this quite a bit when we were sailing, there is currently it's currently very difficult to do like a proper crossing with anything that is fueled under a certain size, because the amount of fuel that you need to carry to make that kind of distance requires a lot of fuel and a lot of mass. So you can get across in a ship, but you can't get across in a small diesel powered boat, because that boat would not have the capacity to carry enough fuel to make that crossing. So we're still reliant on sailing to make these like a
Yeah.
transatlantic crossing or like going to Indonesia.
Yeah, and there's also all of these newer technologies that are coming out to sort of retrofit container ships with these kind of Michelin man looking sailing or sails, and they're even using that to counteract the impact of the fuel. So I think you could get almost, I think I saw 10% and even up to 30% reduction in the amount of fuel just by harnessing the wind. Obviously, they have to rotate in a certain way because the best point of sail and all of that good stuff. So um, it's going to be quite interesting. I mean, you think about ships coming in and out of Cape Town Harbor or into any harbor. It's going to be quite weird to see all of these ships with these massive.
They'd probably take the sails down when coming into harbor and just do the last bit purely on the diesel engine, just because you don't have as much control.
They still have quite a big mast though.
So this is a bit tangential, but it's something that I find quite fascinating. Is arguably the biggest increase in productivity or the biggest optimization that the shipping industry had wasn't the advent of diesel ships. It wasn't, all these new technologies. What it was the standardization of containers. Because if you
Yeah,
think of historically, you would have an ocean going vessel that needs to be packed up. So they would have to have a huge crew lifting stuff up onto the ship, or cranes, whatnot, and then they had to go and store this individually in the hold or on deck, right? And that took a very, very long time to do, right? Packing a ship was an art, and it would be a very, very resource. And when I say resource intensive, I'm talking about like time and effort. Um, so once we standardized containers, all the equipment at a dock and all of the ships uh, satisfy that standard. So you've got a crane that moves containers onto a ship that holds containers, and it changed what would be a weeks long process to being a couple days long process for significantly more cargo. And it turns out that the amount of time in port, especially for like diesel ships and stuff, is super valuable because that could be time spent going to their next destination, and also because they don't turn off their engines. Their engines are still running on idle, because to actually start them again, they need to go through a very complicated multi-step process where they use compressed air to essentially start moving that piston downwards, and then they need to have an electrical motor that is powered by a diesel engine, because a diesel engine doesn't have enough torque to actually get the ball rolling. So it's incredibly difficult to restart a ship once it stops. So they'll pull into a port and they'll just leave it idling,
yeah.
and then pack it, pack it, pack it, pack it, and then off they go.
It's a good thing you can't stall a ship because imagine like doing this and you just stall the ship and then like, oh no, now we're gonna restart this whole thing.
There aren't very many uphills on the ocean. It's like just going up over the equator. Fuck.
Yeah, I mean it's actually quite interesting because like we think of it just as like a normal car where you have one person in control, but you basically have this factory or this power plant that's just you're like humming away, and you just
Mm.
at the top on the deck, you're just like moving the rudders. But there's like an engine master, and they're making sure all of the pressure gauges are all right, and all of those like complicated things. But it's just you know it's a lot more in depth than what we think about.
So when you think about the amount of crew that is necessary to crew an old school ship, right? Because as you know, when you're sailing, you're pulling ropes and you're hoisting masts and you're, furling the jib, unfurling the jib. You've got your genoa flying in the wind or not. Uh, there's constant work that needed to be done. Is as soon as a ship was in the water, and this is still the case right now, it's a full-time job to stop it from just completely falling apart, because the
Mm,
elements are so rugged at sea. You've got corrosion seeping into everything that's metal and starting to chew away at that. You've got wood starting to degrade and it needs another coat of paint, etc., etc., etc. So when you have, an old ship,
mm,
you would actually have a crew of over 100 people to
mm.
just make sure that that ship runs, right? Um, that's crazy. Like a ship of the line, like circa 1805, had a crew of between 750 and 900 people.
Wow. Like I went to like a. I always think of in terms of like how many people were in my high school, and there was probably about 1,000 people. So it's like my whole high school just running one ship.
Right, and they had jobs.
Yeah, they had stuff to do, and I can also imagine, was it the galleys, where they've got these big oar powered boats. You probably have like four people on an oar, and you just like
Yeah.
going along, and I think for a long time the galley was the most maneuverable ship until sailing became more prominent. Just because of you just got one person say left, and everyone just like strokes
Yeah.
more to the one side.
And then you compare that to, giant ships that you have now. Is if you have a, big cargo ship, um it that is, crossing these huge distances, loaded with billions of dollars worth of materials or goods, etc., etc., is most of these vessels, including your officers, your specialists like your electricians and your mechanics and your deckhands and your cooks and your oilers and all of that, it's generally like 20 to 25 personnel, right?
Hmm.
So our ships have gotten huge, and our personnel has shrunk to nearly nothing.
All thanks to automation, um, and just the modernization. But what I still find fascinating is that there are still some remnants of like traditional sailing.
Mm.
I like the idea of the flags. Like you had the flag of where your ship is from, and then you had a flag representing where you are ported. So you always had to have, like if you're in one port, you have to have a flag for that country. I thought that was quite nice, and also, they've got all the different, you know, alpha, beta, foxtrot, all of the different flag types to indicate what's going on. Um, there's, I guess, the whistles, maybe on the sort of bosun's whistle.
Hmm.
It's quite interesting that a lot of that, I guess, it's like a culture, right? It's this like a sailing culture, and especially with some of the nautical terms, the reason why it became like that is because when it comes to a specific situation, you don't have time to second guess what the captain is saying. When they say hold fast on the jib, you gotta know what you're doing.
So I mean, that actually, one of the first things that anyone getting into sailing will notice is that there are a lot of very obscure terms for things, right? Is everything on the boat has got a very specific name, and there are also very specific terms for directions as well as sides. So you don't say left and right, you've got your port and starboard and your fore and aft, and those aren't in relation to you, right? That's in relation to the vessel.
Yeah,
And that's because when you're inside of a situation that orders need to be given, and there are like the lives of the crew and everything are at stake, there's no room for interpretation. There's no like, hey, grab the rope on the left, and it's like, is it your left or my left, or is it the ship's left? It's like, no, grab the rope port side. You can even say to your port side, which is in relation to the ship,
yeah,
but
but it's not even a rope. Ropes are not attached to so it would be a sheet.
it would be a sheet, yeah. Which that one gave me a bit. That one, it takes a bit of a while to like get used to all of this terminology. But once once
Yeah,
you're in it, it makes perfect sense. It's like, okay, yeah, do those things, attach the kringle to the bullhorn.
exactly. And I guess that, I mean, that's the only way to really understand it is you need to really be immersed in the culture, the lifestyle, and the daily activities of sailors. And I think that's probably why you need to have that logbook. Do you have plans to go sailing? I know we've just talked about it, so I'm obviously I'm keen to
Yeah.
some. I've been on Crew Finder, looking at some people who want to do like a sail around somewhere. I don't know where you can sail in London. I guess on the Thames, but I wouldn't say that's a thrilling thing to think about.
Yeah, I'm super keen. Whitney is has got big plans. I mean, she now owns a boat, the Habibi, and is currently racking up her hours in her logbook. Is going to be working on her skippers, her day skippers. She's been doing sailing competitions and stuff, and if she needs a competent crew member just out to do a chill cruise, I'm happy to do that. She wants to do some big stuff like going to Antarctica, which she can't actually do in the Habibi. She'll have to do it in a steel hull boat because of the cold. Um, but that's really cool. So I do plan to do some sailing. Um, I'll definitely say that I have gotten a lot more into land travel since I got my motorcycle. Uh,
Yeah.
and I've become like quite a grease monkey, so I can like do a bunch of stuff. Like I've been repairing engines actually this entire morning.
Oh, nice.
That's also I don't know much about diesel mechanics, which is what you would need for your sailing ships because
Yeah.
they all are also diesel powered in getting in and out of
Mm,
harbor and stuff or on a very slow day.
mm.
Um, but yeah, I certainly do want to do more sailing. It's a lot of fun. It's beautiful, and it's it's one of those things where you respect nature a lot more because you know that it is significantly more powerful than thou.
Yeah, and someone put it. I mean, it wasn't related to sailing, but it's got a certain. It requires a level of ingenuity as you're doing it. Like you need to. I mean, you need to like get the engine running. So there's certain things that you need to pull, and if it's too cold, there's maybe a choke that you need to pull out, and just to get it started, then you got to like it takes a bit of finesse. It's not like just get in, turn on the key. You got to undo the
Yeah,
plug, you got to get everything out, you got to roll everything up, you got to I kind of like that process that's around it too, setting it up. But then it's also there's the maintenance aspect, right? I was looking at boats, but I'm also quite aware that once you acquire one, then you have to maintain one.
yeah, exactly.
But the reason why a lot of these boats are in such good shape after being around for 30 years is probably because they haven't been sailed that much. And yeah, I mean, they're pretty much caravans on the water. Some of them, but
So right before we hopped on this call, there I was reading an article by these students in uh, Eindhoven, the Eindhoven University, where they built a camper van that was entirely electric powered. So, sorry, entirely solar powered. So it would have a bunch of lithium ion batteries and then like a big camper van roof just covered in solar panels. And on a sunny day, they could get as far as like 450 Ks in that day.
hmm,
And they were getting, up to like, it was in miles per hour, 75 miles per hour, which is a good 110 kilometers per hour. And I reckon if you could do something like that, but for a powered sailing vessel, that could be pretty neat. Is
hmm,
you have an electric motor and um, you have solar panels, and I would go as far as to argue that you wouldn't even need a big battery bank. You just make sure that you sail during the day because the sun coming up is more consistent than there being wind.
interesting. Um, Maybe I think when it maybe on the ocean, I feel like there would be more of a consistent wind. But it depends. I guess it depends where you are. Um, I mean, the other thing is like you still got to charge your iPad, and you still.
Yeah, but you can do that. You can do that while the lights on. Well, the lights on. God's light.
But it's also interesting because I wonder what the power requirements. I mean, the reason why you have a big diesel engine is because it probably requires quite a lot of power to push, that boat through the water.
That's fair. There's a lot more resistance in the water than there is on a road.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and also like I know from people who have Priuses that you can get these very specific types of wheels that are like low rolling friction.
Right, right.
But I mean, yeah, ideally if you could have an electrical boat, I think would be quite good. Because I mean, it's you're only really using that motor to get in and out of the harbor, or if you're in irons, or if you're in the middle of nowhere.
I reckon a cool combination of the two would be neat. I think more for bigger vessels also just kind of makes sense is like having a big cruise ship that also just it subsidizes its power with solar and with wind.
Yeah,
So instead of relying just on one, it actually has a bunch of different mechanisms that just increase the efficiencies. I don't see cargo ships doing away with diesel anytime soon. It's just too available of a power source.
I think it's going to be like a combination. So there's going to be hybrid ships, and you also get those vertical turbines, so they spin around rather than having the wheel at the top. So
Yeah,
those you can kind of stack on the roof of, or on the body of a sort of normal ship. And I think the main thing is also like retrofitting. Like, are you able to take existing investments and add onto it and retrofit the engines so that you can have this hybrid model? Um, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see all of those things come to light because it's definitely something that's eating the planet. And I think although at the moment it seems like there's a lot of problems with global trade, but whether that's a topic for another session, then yeah, we'll have to.
so let's talk about sailing from a lifestyle perspective just before we end off this episode, because I could certainly see myself as getting us doing what Whitney is potentially looking to do, getting a small boat, right,
Mm,
and just spending like a year or two just going from port to port and
yeah,
doing that as a form of slow travel. Because I'll say it right now, I hate airports. I hate
mm,
that form of travel. It's just the most convenient way to get to another location. But because I'm also not in a rush right now, is why
yeah.
not, take a decent amount of time to, go and hop between these ports, do some work on the shore, then get back on the boat the next week, um, and off I go. I think John O'Nolan, who's the creator of Ghost, is currently doing that.
I mean, I think it's something that a lot of people are probably thinking right now is, instead of living your day to day, why aren't you going off island hopping? Uh, and I mean, there's no reason not to. It's kind of sad that if you're working a 9 to 5, that you don't have the opportunity to even do that. I mean, a typical crossing usually takes about a month. So I mean, I'm not talking about America, but even in UK, you only get like 21 days leave like throughout the year, like 21 consecutive. So you've only
Mm.
just got enough to do that. So if you wanted to spend 2 days in each stop, then you've kind of out of space, and it's quite a shame that more people
No,
don't.
absolutely, absolutely. So to end off this episode, what are you currently working on? What's your life like?
I mean, it's quite interesting. I'm still trying to find a place. It turns out that September, October is when everyone comes back to university or starts university in the UK, and because everything's open, there's a huge influx of people into London. So the property market is pretty, yeah, saturated with people coming in. So finding a place has been a bit tough. So yeah, but that's me. And you?
My mom came through. I haven't seen her since December, since I was in the States the last time she popped into Cape Town, and it's been very nice seeing her. we went out for dinner last night, and then all this morning I realized my bike was having a hard time starting, and it's because the aftermarket air filter that was installed by the previous owner was causing it to run rich, which is too much fuel, not enough air. So went and I got it running nicely, and yeah, life's good. Summer in Cape Town, summer is here.